When I look back at my money mistakes, there's one common thread that seems to run through all of them, and that's emotion, usually the wrong emotion at the wrong time. So in this video, I'd like to talk about money as if it were a relationship. And we know with people, we've seen good relationships and we've seen bad relationships. Hopefully, we're not in a bad relationship, but we know that typically with the bad relationships, emotions aren't particularly well managed. And so I'd like to use this opportunity to talk about the four signs that of course there may be more, certainly there are more signs, but the four signs I've identified that might be of interest to you that I think are trouble signs that there's something going on with your relationship with money that may need fixing. And by the way, my name's James Harrington, and I started this YouTube channel to talk about the emotional aspects of money and ways we can avoid falling into some common traps. So the first sign is that you avoid it. So what that means is that if you feel like things aren't right, you say, well, I'll address it next week or next month or what have you. And so many times that future never happens. That time never happens to address it. And we see that also when you have bills that start to pile up and you don't look closely at them. You say, well, I really need to analyze that, but I don't have the time. I can't deal with it. It's too stressful, and it tends to snowball. So if that is a type of emotion that you have, then that's something to really consider. And I look at sign one as an inability to face your financial reality. So if you're not able to tackle that problem, that really indicates, it's a sign, it's an important sign that you may not be emotionally capable at the moment to face your financial reality. And I think a lot of people fall into that same category. And I'm not saying you do, but I'm just saying that is one of the signs that I've seen. And I've recognized in myself early on that if something's painful, I tended to avoid it. So this failure to face our financial reality is a real issue. And we see it so often. And it's not just with people who are just scraping by, making very minimal money, but it's also, we see that certainly in wealthy athletes, people who make high income earners, actors, and so forth, that we've read stories about these people that end up broke. And you say, how can that happen? They've made millions of dollars over their life. Yeah, but they've also spent more than they brought in there. But again, it's very common. And so if you think you make enough money where you're immune from it, then maybe you are, but it really depends on your spending patterns, and are you spending more than your income will accommodate. So that's sign number one. I think that's the most important sign, is that you're avoiding your financial issues. You're essentially not facing up to your financial reality. The second sign is that you're using money to fill an emotional need. It could be a need to improve your self-esteem. It could be you're using money to make you happy. Maybe going on an expensive trip would make you happy, perhaps to escape your current reality. And it sounds very similar to number one, where you're avoiding your reality, in this case, your financial reality. So if you're using money to fulfill some sort of emotional need or void, then that's a sign that we should look into it further. And then the flip side of the coin would be that money creates anxiety. So you're on an emotional roller coaster. So, 1 month you've gone on a vacation, you have a wonderful time, you come back, you get the bill, and you say, oh no, now how am I going to pay for that bill? And it could take months or so, or even over a year or more to pay that off. And so that's the flip side of using money to make you happy. Then when the bills come due, it becomes a hamster wheel. You're constantly going back and forth, and you're not getting ahead on anything. In fact, you may be falling further behind. And that leads us to sign number four. You feel trapped. In other words, you feel like you're on that hamster wheel and you're just spinning around and running in place, or worse, you're going backwards. So that is sign number four. So, you look at all of those conditions and you say, well, okay, what can I do to fix that? And really, there's a number of things you can do, but the most important question is, can I fix it? And the answer is absolutely yes. There's things we can do to fix that. But what I found is that the person needs a reason to fix it. They need a why. In other words, the pain of their current existence has to be greater than the fear of making changes or the uncertainty about making changes. So hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but so many times I've seen folks, friends of mine, that just simply can't face their financial reality, and the pain hasn't reached a point where they are willing to make that change. But nothing can change until, it's almost like an addiction. You talk about alcoholism having to hit rock bottom before someone changes. That's in a very extreme condition. But with money, you still have to have some sort of reason why you want to change. And so for me, when I was younger, I used to love to think about traveling back in time, going into the future and so forth. And that got me thinking about investing. Obviously, we can't go back in time and buy the first Coca-Cola stock or anything like that. That's sort of fantasy. But when you think about what would it be like to be able to look into the future and to talk with your future self? Well, that's something you can do now. That's something you can do now. You can do a thought experiment and say, okay, what would my future self, what sort of life do I want at 65, at 60, 65? And back when I was in my late 20s, I started asking myself that. I said, well, what would my future self want? And that, for me, that helped to change my perspective about money, because I knew that the money that I was spending at that time, at that moment, gave me pleasure, but I was making a choice. Do I spend it now for pleasure, or do I add a little bit of discipline and set it aside for my future self? And so that's a concept that I think has worked well for me over the years. But again, you don't think about a future self if you don't have a reason why. In other words, if you think, well, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive, at 65 or what have you, or I have needs right now I have to take care of. It's more important now. And certainly that's understandable. It's the mindset of most people. But if you can do your own little experiment and say, well, every time before you spend, you make a spending decision, think, okay, do I really need it? And what could I do with that money in the future? And think how much that money would be more valuable in the future. $100, $1,000, $10,000 saved now. Can you imagine what that would be 10, 20, 15 years? I mean, you don't have to imagine it. You can calculate it out. It would be worth, well, quite a bit. So that's a concept to help fix the problem. If you have any of these trouble issues, what would my future self want? What type of future do I want? And how do I get to there? How do I get to that future? And then the next idea is just simply to start with a very small task and say, okay, my task today is I'm going to look at what I'm spending money on. And I'm going to ask myself that question. Do I really need to spend money on that item? Or can I get a less expensive item, or simply not get it at all? So that's another idea. And that's a concept of, if you're starting New Year's resolution, you're going to run the Boston Marathon. Well, you don't go out and try to run several miles in the first day or week. You're going to work your way up to it. And so if you've gotten yourself into a hole financially, then that's going to take time. I mean, it's too overwhelming to try to tackle it all at once. And so what we want to avoid is you getting burned out or overwhelmed with it. But with taking a small task, small piece of that, and fixing it and working on it, thinking about it, working on it, and so forth, you start to get some wins, and then that snowballs. It helps build your self-confidence more and more. And again, it gets back to what I was talking about, emotions, that if we can shift our relationship with money to a more positive and responsible way of thinking, then a lot of these problems with not managing money successfully, that starts to turn around and things start to get easier and you start to accumulate money. So those are some ideas, and I'll be posting some other videos along the same line. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you in other videos. Thank you.